Okay, so these are the scyphozoans. This is the second group of the cnidarians. These are the true jellyfish. And remember, they've only got a tissue level of organization. No tissues, no organs. No organs, no heart. Even if it's Valentine's Day week. But they do have radial symmetry. You can cut them any way you want, and they're symmetrical on either side. And the jellyfish in the scyphozoans are better swimmers than the jellyfish of the hydrozoan. They simply expand and contract the base of the bell, and that's what elastic recoil and the contraction is what gives them propulsion through the water. So they're not completely at the mercy of the currents. These organisms range markedly in size, from less than a centimeter across the bell to more than 2 meters across the bell. Some tentacles can stretch for close to 100 feet and even more than that. And the cyanea, the one that's pictured at the bottom of this particular slide here, is the largest jellyfish that we know, and it can get to that size within 1 to 2 years of its life. So remember, with their radial symmetry, they are equally capable from all sides. Doesn't matter which side they approach their environment or their environment approaches them. That radial symmetry gives them equal capacity in all directions. The number and the length of their tentacles varies a lot. Here in the moon jelly, they've got very, very slender tentacles, very short, whereas in other jellies, you've got these really long tentacles. A lot of these scyphozoan jellyfish will have oral arms, which reach down, and in the side of the oral arms, you'll find the mouth opening. Here you can see the basic medusa orientation. The scyphozoans spend the majority of their life cycle in the medusa form. It's larger and longer lasting than the hydrozoan medusas, and we orient ourselves so that we have the aboral or non-oral surface up here, and then the oral surface or sub-umbrella surface is down below. They got a terrifically simple body plan. They've got an ectoderm, which is the outer layer of skin. They've got an endoderm, which is the tissue that lines the inside of the gut here. So remember, a tissue level of organization. They've got mesoglia. This is the tissue inside the two layers, the ectoderm and the endoderm. They've got a mouth opening here, a single entrance. They have tentacles that have stinging cells, which they sting their prey. The prey gets brought up into the mouth, and remember, extracellular digestion. They release enzymes from the tissues here lining the gut or the gastrovascular cavity, and that is where both things go in and things go out. As I mentioned, they have this dominant medusa stage. They spend the majority of their life there, but they can also travel in shoals, and the shoaling part of their life is something that's really in question by scientists as to what's the purpose. Is it just by chance? Is it because they're in mating aggregations or feeding aggregations? And we'll talk more about this. But how would you like to be this person right in the middle of the shoal? So here we've got much more sophisticated sensory structures. The scyphozoans have something called a rhopalia, and that rhopalia is a sense container, if you will. And you'll find eye spots there, photosensitive cells that can pick up light, tell them how far from the surface that they are. They have something called a statocyst, which is really similar to what happens in your inner ear. They've got little stone inside with some sensory hairs that gives them up and down orientation. And then they also have a sense of smell. They can detect the smell of their prey or the smell of potential predators, and those chemosensory pits. All of these are found in the rhopalia, usually found on the edge or the margin of the bell. Here we can see the statocyst part here, which is the up from down organ, and then also we've got the eye here, and this is all coming out from the area just above the fringe of the bell there. This is a great little black and white photograph of your typical looking scyphomedusa. So this is a scyphozoan medusa. Here you can see the rhopalia right on the edge of the bell, and then you've got your tentacles, and then the oral arms, which are hanging down from around the mouth. The top part is what we call the bell. This bell is where you find all that mesoglia, and then inside, in this almost transparent kind of structure, this is the stomach pouch or the gastrovascular cavity. As I mentioned before, they have just one entry and one exit in the oral area, and so some people perceive this to be both an a mouth and an anus. The question I would have here in terms of what's misleading about this cartoon is what exactly is jellyfish poop? They don't have a digestive system, so they're not forming excretory materials quite like that, and they've got very powerful enzymes. So the question for me would be, do they really digest in a way that creates something that we would qualify as poop? As we saw in the hydrozoan slideshow, there are all these radial canals here. These radial canals are the connector ways in which food goes from the stomach out to the rest of the body of the organism and provides nutrition for the part of the body that's not doing the digestion. So as with any cnidarian, the scyphozoans have the nematocysts that are contained within the cnidocyte. So the cnidocyte is the cell that contains the nematocyst. Here's our cnidocyte here. This is the trigger for the nematocyst. They usually need both a mechanical and a chemical trigger so that they don't fire off their nematocysts just willy-nilly. They don't want to waste them because it takes 48 hours to regenerate a nematocyst because you can only fire a single nematocyst once. So once you fire it, it's done. So they want to try to figure out a way to not shoot them without just cause. So requiring both a mechanical and a chemical trigger means that you're not just firing your nematocysts at something that's too far away. Crazy thing about these nematocysts is that they can fire within 700 nanoseconds of the impetus of the trigger, and they can fire at more than 5 million Gs of acceleration. So not all nematocysts are equal. The nematocysts of the moon jelly here are very, very gentle. You can get brushed by those and you wouldn't even feel it, some of you. However, if you were to look at something as powerful as a box jellyfish here, their nematocysts are remarkable and they can leave quite some damage there. Some of them even are deadly for some people. This is something called an irukandji jellyfish, and while it's teeny, it's also got powerful, powerful stinging venom which can create havoc in the human body. Some of them are just plain beautiful, and these olindas, the cigar jellies, just can have the most diaphanous and most beautiful tentacles in the ocean. The cyanea are big and they capture our imagination in big kinds of ways. Sherlock Holmes, in one of his adventures, encountered a cyanea jellyfish, also called the lion's mane jellyfish. They've got all kinds of shapes, all kinds of colors, and all kinds of arrangements of tentacles. Need I say more? Some can glow. They create these beautiful fluorescent proteins that cause them to glow in the dark. Now remember, they exhibit an alternation of generations life cycle, which includes both sexual and asexual reproduction. There's some humor in this particular cartoon because if you looked at a jellyfish, you wouldn't be able to tell male from female, and this jellyfish seems to appreciate the concept that we can distinguish sexes in humans. The basic alternation of generation life cycle in the scyphozoans includes the medusa form, right, having both male and female versions, and they release the sperm and the eggs out into the water column. Those encounter one another by chemical attractants in the water column. Once fertilization takes place, the zygote turns into a planula larvae. Those planula settle down underneath something, oftentimes, or on the substrate. They develop from the beginning polyp stage to what's called the strobulating polyp phase, in which case each of these little layers is going to become a separate medusa adult produced by asexual reproduction. Once they release from the strobulating polyp, these are called the ephyra. Those ephyra float around as a larval form of the jellyfish, and eventually they will produce the medusa. So if you were to look carefully at these, you might think, okay, so how do they carry out this reproductive process? But if you look right here, right, all of these four structures are gonadal tissue, and you can see them quite clearly in this moon jelly. But these are the places where they're going to produce their gametes. Once those gametes are produced, then you end up with, again, your alternation of generations life cycle. The medusa form produces sperm and egg. They fertilize in the water column. A larvae is formed. That larvae eventually settles down to the polyp. You get the strobulating polyp phase and then the ephyra phase. So sexual reproduction happens from the medusa form, so those are the sexually reproducing structures, and then the polyp is the asexual reproducing phase. So here are some different forms of the polyp itself. You can see these are moving towards strobilation, and then as they get more mature, you get these discs forming. These will be the strobilating polyps. They pop off in the same way that a strobe light sort of flashes, and you eventually will get all these individual ephyra coming off of a strobilating polyp. This is what the ephyra looks like here. It's a beautiful, very simple organismal structure, and it floats around in the water column, part of the plankton, until it matures into an adult form. Not all jellyfish have the same sort of niche in the world. These Cassiopeia jellyfish, also called the upside-down jellyfish, harbor symbiotic dinoflagellates in their tissue. Those dinoflagellates will produce food through photosynthesis, and they'll provide the nourishment for the upside-down jellyfish, the Cassiopeia, to nourish itself. It does capture a few things in those tentacles, but rarely. Almost the vast majority of its nutrition comes from the photosynthetic process and the symbiosis that they have with the dinoflagellates. But most jellyfish capture their prey. Here you can see this jellyfish has two different fish in its bell here, and it's going to be digesting those in its gastrovascular cavity. This one has caught a beautiful little shrimp in its tentacles, and it's bringing it up to its mouth to bring it into its gastrovascular cavity and digest it in there. Jellyfish are seldom prey because of their stinging cells. Nobody really likes to eat something that has that kind of a kick to it, but these turtles have very, very tough mouths, and so they make a lot of business feeding on jellyfish. Plenty of food, and while it's mostly water, 95% water, they still provide a tremendous amount of nutrition for a number of species of turtles. Ecologically speaking, we're seeing huge upticks in the numbers of jellyfish in the oceans these days. Nobody's quite sure why. We'll be doing some investigating of that as we move our way further into the world of jellies. But you can see that there is a tremendous amount of jellyfish here. This particular net of jellyfish almost sank this boat. With the increase of jellyfish in the ocean, some scientists are really trying to figure out how can we make them more palatable to people. But the truth is, some people do eat jellyfish. Here you can see jellyfish on some chopsticks right there. The tentacles are prepared and dried and prepared in a particular way. And some people really like the tang. You can get them for $5.99 a pound. And perhaps this is what comprises the world of jellyfish horror stories. Maybe they're beginning to think, hey, I might be next. But perhaps it's not predation that's really the biggest threat to jellyfish or to organisms in the ocean. Here you can see that this particular jellyfish has just a little bit of confusion about who he's bringing home.